The rain had been falling since afternoon, a steady, unbroken rhythm that seemed to echo the noise in Ethan's head. By the time he reached the gallery that evening, the streets shimmered under the weight of water and distant neon. Julian stood waiting just inside, his shirt damp at the collar, hair curling slightly from the humidity. He smiled as Ethan entered, and that smile, gentle, certain, unraveled every hesitation Ethan had carried with him. They didn't speak at first. Julian simply handed him a towel, a small gesture that felt oddly intimate. The space was quiet except for the rain against the glass walls. Tonight, the exhibition was closed. Julian had told him he wanted to show one last collection before it moved to another city. Ethan had almost declined. Almost. But something about the idea of being seen again, of being somewhere that wasn't full of silence, had drawn him here like gravity that he followed Julian between canvases that glimmered faintly under low lights. Each piece looked like a confession painted into shape, fractures, light, and shadow dancing across the walls. Julian stopped before one in particular, its surface streaked with silver and ash. "It's about things people don't say," he murmured. "What we hide to survive." Ethan's voice was quiet. "Does it ever work? Hiding?" Julian looked at him. "Only until someone looks closely." Ethan turned away from his gaze, staring at the texture of the paint. He could feel his chest tighten. That sentence had struck too close. The truth was that hiding had become a habit, one he'd perfected beside Michael, where everything personal had turned practical. Michael wasn't cruel, just distant. And Ethan had grown tired of trying to be heard by someone who refused to listen. Julian's voice cut through his thoughts. "You seem tired of pretending." Ethan laughed softly, without humor. "I don't even know who I'm pretending for anymore." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was charged. Julian stepped closer, slow enough for Ethan to move if he wanted. He didn't. The sound of rain filled the distance between them until Julian's voice dropped, almost a whisper. "You said you couldn't take it anymore." Ethan met his eyes. "I did. And yet you came. I told myself it was just for the art." Julian's smile was sad. "You knew it wasn't." Ethan should have stepped back, should have said something to end the moment before it became irreversible. But when Julian brushed a strand of wet hair from his forehead, Ethan felt the tremor of something he'd buried too long. His heart beat against his ribs like it wanted to be heard. He whispered, "Julian, I can't." Julian's response was a breath against his skin. "Then don't say anything." It wasn't the kind of passion born from recklessness. It was quiet, searching, the collision of two people who had been lonely for too long. The rain outside grew louder, as if it were trying to drown out what they were doing. And when it was over, the silence returned, soft, fragile, real. Ethan sat at the edge of the couch, still catching his breath. The faint smell of paint and rain lingered in the air. Julian stood nearby, looking out the window, saying nothing. Ethan felt the weight of what had just happened settle in his chest. Guilt, fear, relief, they all mixed until he couldn't tell them apart. "I warned you," he said quietly. "I said I couldn't take it." Julian turned, his eyes calm. "You didn't take anything. You just stopped giving everything away." Ethan wanted to argue, to call it what it was, but he didn't. Words felt too small for the ache in his chest. He dressed in silence, every movement careful, as though making noise might break the fragile air around them. Before leaving, Julian touched his hand, a fleeting gesture, and said, "Don't hate yourself for wanting to feel alive." Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. The walk home felt endless. Ethan's reflection in each window he passed looked like a stranger's, someone braver, and yet far more lost. When he entered the apartment, Michael was asleep on the couch again, the television humming faintly. The soft blue light fell across his face, making him look peaceful, almost innocent. Ethan stood there for a moment, trying to remember the last time he'd touched him, really touched him, without distance between them. He couldn't. That he moved quietly to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. His hands were trembling. The guilt came in slow waves, crashing and retreating before he could breathe. He wanted to cry, but nothing came. He lay down, staring at the ceiling, the rain whispering against the windows. Somewhere in the next room, Michael stirred but didn't wake. Morning came gray and cold. Michael left early, leaving behind the usual note on the counter, meeting till late. Don't wait up. Ethan stared at it, then folded it neatly and placed it in the trash. His phone vibrated once, a message from Julian. You left your scarf. Want me to drop it off? Ethan typed back, no, it's fine. Keep it. Then deleted the message before sending it. He couldn't trust himself anymore. The following week unfolded like a slow punishment. He tried to act normal, but the world felt tilted. Every sound seemed sharper, every silence heavier. At work, he caught himself smiling for no reason, then panicking that someone might notice. When Michael spoke to him, small things, routine things, Ethan's responses came delayed, as if his thoughts were always somewhere else. Julian didn't push. There were no more texts, no calls. But one evening, as Ethan walked home, he saw him across the street, hands in pockets, waiting at a light. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. The ache returned, fierce and familiar. Later that night, Ethan stood on the balcony, watching lightning flicker behind the clouds. He told himself it was over, that it had been a mistake, that he would forget. But memory has its own rhythm. He remembered Julian's words, his touch, the way he'd listened without judgment. He remembered how it felt to be seen. Michael came out of the bedroom then, rubbing his eyes. You're still up? Ethan nodded. Just couldn't sleep. Michael leaned against the doorway. You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay? For a heartbeat, Ethan thought this might be the moment, the one where he finally told the truth, where everything could still be mended. But when he looked into Michael's tired face, he saw only confusion, not understanding. He forced a small smile. Yeah. Just work. Michael nodded and went back inside. The door clicked softly shut. Ethan exhaled and pressed his palms against the railing. His breath fogged in the cold air. He whispered into the dark, I can't take it anymore. The next day, as he left for work, his phone buzzed again. A new message appeared on the screen. Julian, I'm sorry if I crossed a line. But I can't pretend that night didn't mean something. Ethan stared at it for a long time before sliding the phone back into his pocket. That evening, he didn't go straight home. He walked the long way through the rain, the city lights glimmering on wet asphalt. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew he was walking toward another mistake, and when he finally reached the corner near the gallery, Julian was standing there, waiting, no words, no explanations. Just a quiet understanding that neither of them could undo what had begun. Ethan stopped, caught between fear and desire, conscience and longing, and though the night was cold, he didn't turn away. The next morning, Ethan woke with the uneasy residue of dreams that wouldn't quite dissolve. Daniel's words echoed in his mind, sometimes people only see what they're ready to understand. The sentence clung to him, weaving itself through every thought that day. He tried to paint, but the brush refused to move as freely as it used to. His art, once his escape, now mirrored his confusion. Over the following weeks, Daniel seemed more distant, often canceling plans with vague excuses. Yet when they did speak, he was tender, thoughtful, almost protective. Ethan wanted to believe it was just stress or fear, that love sometimes required patience. But a small, growing voice in his mind whispered otherwise. At home, Robert's behavior had shifted too. Claire mentioned during one of their phone calls that he'd been spending more time working late. She said it lightly, as though it were nothing unusual, but Ethan caught the trace of worry in her tone. He brushed it off, telling himself it was just parental instinct. Still, something about the overlap unsettled him. Daniel's sudden elusiveness, his father's absences, both circling the same unspoken mystery point. One evening, Daniel invited Ethan over to a rented apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't the first time Ethan had been there, but that night, something about the place felt different. A framed photo on the shelf caught his eye, a familiar park bench, the one near his parents' neighborhood. Daniel noticed his gaze. "You like that spot?" Daniel asked, his tone calm but watchful. "I grew up near there," Ethan replied. "It's strange. I've never seen anyone take that exact picture." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe we've crossed paths before and didn't know it." Ethan laughed softly, but his heart gave a small, uncertain flutter. "Maybe." As the night went on, the conversation drifted from art to childhood. Daniel listened intently, his questions gentle but probing. When Ethan mentioned his father, his rigidity, his pride, Daniel's expression shifted for just a moment, as if something unspoken had struck him. "He sounds complicated," Daniel said quietly. "He is," Ethan replied. "But he tries. I just wish he'd see me, really see me." Daniel's eyes softened, though his voice trembled slightly. "Sometimes people only understand what they're brave enough to face." The repetition of that phrase chilled Ethan. He tried to mask his reaction, nodding slowly, pretending it was just another coincidence. But the air between them thickened, as though truth hovered just beneath the surface. Later that night, when Daniel stepped into the kitchen to pour wine, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "Dad's been acting strange lately. He keeps saying he needs time alone. Are you okay?" Ethan glanced toward the kitchen doorway. Daniel was humming softly, the low tune oddly familiar. His father used to hum the same melody on Sunday mornings. His chest tightened. It couldn't be. His mind raced to connect fragments that refused to align: the phrasing, the park photo, the tune. They were just coincidences, they had to be. But then, Daniel returned with 2 glasses of wine and said something that stopped Ethan cold. "You remind me of someone I used to know, someone who wanted the world to make sense before they could love themselves." It was a phrase his father had once told him when he came out at 18, word for word. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. The glass trembled in his hand. He forced a smile, pretending not to notice, not to understand. The rest of the evening passed in fragmented conversation, his mind caught between disbelief and dawning fear. When Daniel finally left for a meeting, Ethan sat in silence, surrounded by shadows. He couldn't sleep. At midnight, his curiosity overtook his restraint. He picked up Daniel's coat, which he had left draped over the couch, intending to hang it up, but as he lifted it, a wallet slipped from the inside pocket. He hesitated before picking it up. His conscience begged him to stop, to respect privacy. But his instincts screamed otherwise. Inside was a driver's license. The name was what shattered everything: Robert Cole. Ethan's breath caught violently. His body went rigid, a tremor crawling down his spine. He blinked, hoping he'd read it wrong, but the letters stayed fixed, undeniable. The photo showed his father, younger, smiling faintly, and beside it, a folded paper tucked neatly into the wallet's sleeve. Ethan unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a rental agreement. The address was Daniel's apartment. His chest constricted, air refused to come easily. Daniel wasn't just some mysterious stranger. He was his father, not in body, but in disguise, in deceit, in betrayal deeper than Ethan could have imagined. Robert had been living a double life, pretending to be someone else, pretending to understand Ethan by becoming the kind of man Ethan might fall for. The room swayed. Ethan dropped the wallet as if it burned him. Everything, every conversation, every message, turned sickeningly false. The affection, the compassion, the warmth that had felt healing now reeked of manipulation. He stumbled to the bathroom sink and splashed water on his face, trying to steady his breathing. The mirror stared back at him, fractured and foreign. How could his father have done this? Was it a test? A punishment? Or worse, an attempt to feel what Ethan felt, to study his son's love from inside the wound itself? By morning, Ethan couldn't bring himself to speak to anyone. His phone lit up with messages from Daniel. "Are you okay? You left something behind, please, don't disappear." He ignored them all. Each word now felt like poison. That evening, he drove to his parents' house without fully deciding why. The drive blurred past him, light smearing across his windshield, heart pounding against his ribs. When he arrived, Claire opened the door, surprised to see him. Robert wasn't home. He said he had another late meeting, she said softly. Ethan forced a nod, his voice barely holding steady. Yeah. I figured. He walked through the living room, taking in every detail, the framed photos, the smell of coffee, the piano in the corner. It all looked exactly the same, and yet none of it felt real anymore. When Robert finally came home near midnight, he froze at the sight of Ethan standing by the window. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was no longer invisible, it was alive, pulsing through the air. I know, Ethan said finally, his voice shaking. I know who Daniel is. Robert's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Ethan's eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. Was this your way of understanding me? Pretending to be someone else? Lying to me just to feel control again? Ethan, don't, he said sharply. You don't get to say my name like that. Silence swallowed the room. Claire stirred upstairs, but didn't come down. The truth, heavy and irreparable, hung between them like a storm neither could escape. Ethan turned toward the door, his voice low but steady. You wanted to understand me, Dad. Congratulations. Now you know what it feels like to be broken by someone you love. He walked out before Robert could respond. The night air hit him like glass, sharp, cold, unforgiving. As he drove away, the road ahead blurred through the shimmer of tears he could no longer hold back. Behind him, the house stood still in the dark, and inside it, a father finally faced the weight of what understanding truly meant, and for the first time, Ethan didn't look back. Aaron came home 2 days later. The house looked as it always did, immaculate, polished, quietly lifeless. He dropped his suitcase by the door and kissed my cheek with the efficiency of routine. His scent was faintly metallic, the kind of smell that clings to people who live more in offices than in homes. How was the trip? I asked. Exhausting, he said, loosening his tie. But good. Productive. He walked into the kitchen, glancing briefly at the counter where the plumber's card used to sit. I'd moved it, buried it deep inside a drawer I hadn't opened since. I see the leak's fixed, he said. Yeah, I replied. Ryan came back the next morning. Aaron nodded without looking at me. Glad you handled it. He poured himself a drink and sat on the couch, turning on the TV. Within minutes, the room filled with the glow of moving images and the sound of strangers talking. I sat beside him, pretending to watch, though the only thing I noticed was the distance between us, a space that had become both familiar and unbearable. Later that night, we lay in bed, backs turned. The silence between us was heavier than the darkness. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the occasional sigh from Aaron as he drifted toward sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind circling around the same thought I'd been trying to ignore. I wanted to call Ryan. The urge was absurd. The leak was fixed, my life was intact, and yet something inside me refused to quiet down. It wasn't about desire exactly, it was about the feeling of being seen. When Ryan looked at me, it was as though he saw the parts of me I'd forgotten existed. By the third night, the rain returned, a steady downpour that rattled against the windows like a quiet insistence. I went downstairs to check the kitchen, almost hoping to hear the sound of dripping water. At first, there was nothing. Then, a single drop hit the metal sink. Another followed. It wasn't much, but it was enough that I didn't think. I just called. Ethan, Ryan said after the first ring, his voice calm, familiar. You okay? There's a small leak again, I said. I'm sorry, it's late. I'll be there soon, he replied, and hung up. When the doorbell rang, it was just past midnight. Aaron was still asleep upstairs. I opened the door and found Ryan standing there, hair wet, jacket darkened by the rain. He smiled, but his eyes carried a quiet understanding, as though he already knew this visit wasn't just about plumbing. Persistent house you've got, he said softly. Yeah, I managed. Guess it doesn't like being ignored. He set down his tool bag and knelt by the sink again. The rhythmic sound of the wrench turning filled the silence. I leaned against the counter, my heartbeat unsteady, my thoughts louder than the rain outside. After a few minutes, Ryan sat back inside. "You know, it's strange," he said, wiping his hands. "Pipes like this, sometimes they break because of pressure. Too much force inside with nowhere to go. It builds until something finally gives." I met his eyes. "That sounds familiar." He smiled faintly. "You ever think maybe you're holding too much in?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "You don't even know me." He studied me for a moment. "Maybe not. But I know that look. I've seen it before, people trying to fix everything but themselves." Something in his tone undid me. I wanted to argue, to deflect, but the truth sat too close to the surface. "You make it sound simple," I said quietly. "It's not," Ryan replied. "But it starts with being honest, at least with yourself." The air thickened. Neither of us moved. The rain outside softened into a mist, and the only sound was the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. "I don't even know what I'm doing," I admitted. "I just feel lost." Ryan stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Then maybe you're finally ready to be found." He was close now, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him. I didn't step back. He didn't move forward. The space between us was small, electric. "I should go," he said finally, his voice low. "Yeah," I whispered, though I didn't mean it. He reached for his bag but paused, his hand brushing mine on the counter, light, accidental, deliberate. The contact was brief, but it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. My breath caught. "He didn't look away, Ethan," he said softly. "Some things can't be repaired by pretending they're not broken." The words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to respond, to confess something, anything, but before I could, my phone buzzed on the table. Aaron's name lit up the screen that I didn't answer. Ryan's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to me. For a moment, he looked as if he might say something else, but he only nodded. "Take care of yourself," he said, his tone steady but his expression uncertain. Then he walked toward the door. The sound of the rain grew louder as he stepped outside. I stood there, frozen, watching his figure fade into the darkness until the van's headlights disappeared at the corner. I picked up the phone, staring at Aaron's missed call. One new message: "Couldn't sleep. You okay?" I typed back, "Yeah, just checking the leak," then deleted it before sending. Instead, I turned off the phone and leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The kitchen felt different now, fuller somehow. The air carried the faint scent of rain and metal, the echo of a voice that had cut too close to truth. I turned on the faucet. The water flowed perfectly, clear and constant. No leaks, no noise. Everything was fixed. And yet, the quiet that followed didn't feel like peace, it felt like pressure, waiting to break again. Upstairs, Aaron stirred in his sleep. I stood in the kitchen a little longer, staring at the silver tap, the soft reflection of my own face staring back. The house was silent, but inside me, something had started to move, a slow, certain shift I couldn't undo. When I finally turned off the light, I knew the line between loyalty and longing had blurred, and though nothing had been said or done, something had already changed forever.